Hey, what's up, HQ fam? Welcome to OS Talk, where we take a quick look at an operating system and discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly. This OS Talk has been requested by Ian, so let's get into it right after this. Hey everyone, welcome back. So today we're going to be briefly discussing Raspberry Pi OS, formerly known as Raspbian. Ian asked, what do you think about the default Raspberry Pi OS that a normal user would see when they first start using the 400? And for reference, for those of you that don't know, he's referring to a Raspberry Pi 400 and left this comment on another video that I posted discussing the Raspberry Pi 400 as your daily driver or primary computer. And in that video, I covered Ubuntu, Manjaro, and Twister operating systems. And if you'd like to watch that video, you can check it out by clicking on the link above. Okay, so here we are on the Raspberry Pi OS desktop. You can see here in the terminal window that I have up, we are running the latest version of Raspberry Pi OS, which is Bullseye, based off of Debian 11. Taking a quick look at what you get out of the box, if you focus your attention to the menu bar at the top of the screen, Raspberry Pi OS uses LXDE as a desktop environment. LXDE stands for Lightweight X11 Desktop Environment. What does that mean to someone who doesn't know what a desktop environment is? Well, nothing. It simply means that the desktop environment was designed to use minimal system resources, because let's face it, the Pi doesn't have a lot of resources to spare. Starting in the upper right hand corner, we have our clock. If you click on the clock, it populates a calendar. Next, we have our volume control, as well as our Wi-Fi and Bluetooth shortcuts. Moving over to the left, you get Terminal, File Manager, and Chromium, which is your stock web browser, pinned to the menu bar. Next, we have our Raspberry Pi logo, which is where you're going to find your installed applications and system settings. As we look at the menu, you'll see that Raspberry Pi OS in this latest update has really been slimmed down. We don't get a lot of programming applications, we're missing an Office suite that comes pre-installed, and there's not a lot of applications that are considered extras, or someone may need if they're going to try and use this as an actual desktop replacement. Instead, what they've done is added an application called Recommended Software under the Help section of the menu bar. This is done intentionally to keep the file size of the operating system smaller. The Raspberry Pi has become very popular over the years, and by doing this, it allows the user to customize their experience by only installing the applications that they want. But it also allows you to utilize a smaller micro SD card if you so choose. Now, at inception, the Raspberry Pi's main focus was on learning and teaching programming, so naturally Raspberry Pi OS, or then called Raspbian, came preloaded with a bunch of programming-focused software. Now, if we fast forward nearly 10 years, more and more people are utilizing the Raspberry Pi as an inexpensive desktop replacement. So if we take a look at the recommended software, you'll find most, if not all, of the software that used to come pre-installed on Raspberry Pi OS is located within this application. As an example, let's install LibreOffice by selecting the box to the right of the application and clicking Apply at the bottom of the window. From here, it will download the required packages and install them. Once it is installed, we should have a new item labeled Office in the menu bar. And this is where you will find LibreOffice after it's installed. Now let's open it up real quick just to show you that it did work. And there it is, you see it opened up without any issues. So that was just a quick look at the interface right out of the box. Now let's get a little deeper talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Starting off with the good, one of the most important things I think someone looks for in an operating system in general, regardless of the type of computer you're trying to run it on, is stability. And Raspberry Pi OS is rock solid in terms of stability. The operating system is designed by the Raspberry Pi Foundation, and therefore it does not miss a beat when it comes to drivers, updates, and applications, so long as you're willing to live within the confines of what the Raspberry Pi Foundation provides. They've published a book, which you can see here, called the Official Raspberry Pi Beginner's Guide, and this is the pinnacle of how-to books for the Pi, especially for those that are new to Linux. They also have various sections of the book as guides online for free within the help section right in Raspberry Pi OS, right in the menu bar. So you can see here we have a Get Started section, Help, Projects, and these are all things that are going to be extremely helpful to someone who's brand new to Linux or the Raspberry Pi, both. It walks you through how to set up the Raspberry Pi, how to install an operating system if you don't understand that piece, from flashing it to the micro SD card, all of that. The simple basic command line stuff for Linux on how to navigate around. If you get the book, it'll walk you through various programming, using Scratch. It's just, overall, it's a very good book, and like I said, a lot of the resources are built in here to the operating system with very good guides, and I think that's what the biggest strength that the Raspberry Pi OS has going for it. And it's not to say that other Linux distributions don't provide any kind of support. It's just more of, you kind of have to go digging for it, so to speak, whether you're looking at man files within terminal, which some of you might not even know what that is, but or doing research in forums or various online entities, where this, as you can see, is all just built in. Like, if you can go straight to the subject you're looking for, and it will walk you through it. And I think that's great. As you can see here, this is walking you through basic terminal commands. It's just a great resource. And then if, let's say, you wanted to do a project, or your kids wanted to learn how to code something, you could pull that up here too, and it'll walk you through how to do all various projects with Scratch. I think this is great for children, great for people wanting to learn Linux in general. And with that, it's not that you can't use this as a full-on desktop computer, but it is going to require everybody to learn a certain level of knowledge and be able to use terminal and be comfortable with that. And with that, I think this is a good segue to cover the bad. So the average person buys a Raspberry Pi without any Linux experience at all. The low price tag, flashy buzzwords like cheap desktop replacement, and all the attention on social media likely sucked you into buying one of these things. Because of this, the first thing I think most beginners will have an issue with is the way in which you have to add and remove applications in the Raspberry Pi OS. There are two ways to add and remove programs, and I'll bet that the majority of people rely heavily on the add-remove software application, because you're going to be coming from Windows, Mac OS, something that's going to provide you that graphical user interface. If we open this up, you will see that we have our categories on the left, similar to how the recommended software application functions. The difference here is that on the right side, instead of showing you only installable software applications like Firefox or LibreOffice, it also shows you individual packages that may not be an application. A package in Linux is similar to an executable file or a .exe file in Windows. It's a single file that basically contains a bunch of compressed files. And if you're new to Linux, it gets a bit tricky because programs like Firefox and LibreOffice can also be contained within a package that you run to install that specific software. So enough about that, let's just show you what I mean. So if we search for Firefox, you'll see that instead of it only showing us the Mozilla Firefox application we get a list of things the software thinks are related to Firefox in one way or another. In this case, you would have to sort through all of these things trying to find the correct package to install to get the Firefox application, which, depending on the amount of returns we receive from our search, it could take a while. So what if we refine our search to Mozilla Firefox to make it more specific? You'd think that that would give us just the application we're looking for, right? Nope. So using the add remove software application can be hit or miss, and this is why people who have been using Linux for any length of time use the command line interface or terminal to add or remove applications. So with just a few short commands that only take a few seconds to type, you can have your application downloading and installing. can see here, we have Firefox installed. And so the issue here isn't that you can't do something on the Raspberry Pi OS that you could do on a different operating system. It's just the fact that there is a somewhat steep learning curve, especially if you've never used terminal or the command line before. And to the average person, it probably seems archaic to have to type commands to accomplish anything. If you look at any of the operating systems I talk about in the Pi 400 video I linked earlier, you don't have to deal with this to such a degree. Taking a look at the Manjaro ARM for the Raspberry Pi, it too has an add remove software application, but what they did right is they list the applications before dependencies or any other packages. And to show you this, let's try and install Mozilla Thunderbird because Firefox already comes pre-installed in Manjaro. So you'll see that the application is listed here right at the top of everything, with everything else below it. And with just a few clicks, you'll have the application installed without ever needing to open terminal or type a single command. Now you can still do that if you choose to, but for most beginners looking for a desktop replacement, they don't want to deal with this sort of thing. You're already trying to figure out where things are and what you can or can't do in a new operating system. Having to learn terminal commands right out the gate makes using Linux cumbersome for those who don't care about that sort of thing, and they just want to be able to install the operating system, get the applications they need, and use the machine as an everyday computer. They're not trying to do anything fancy, crazy, or nerdy. They just want to be able to check their emails, surf the web, type a paper, that sort of thing. And with that, that moves us into the last category, which is the ugly. This section isn't going to make you feel any better about choosing to use Raspberry Pi OS. So your settings, your preferences, and your ability to change them from a GUI is lacking in Raspberry Pi OS. And so what I mean by that is if we take, for example, our clock. So it's in the upper right hand corner. You notice the display is in 24-hour increments instead of 12-hour increments. Well, one would think that changing this would be a simple task or a toggle button, but like many things in Raspberry Pi OS, the refinement, it's just not there. So you'll see we have no toggle button. In order to change this, we have to go to clock format, where we have %R, which corresponds to 24-hour formatting. If we change it to %r, like you see here, it changes to 12-hour formatting. The only way you're going to know this is if you know the options and attributes to the date command that you would use in terminal. And so someone coming into this brand new is not going to have that kind of knowledge. And to change something like this that's so simple, it's going to require them research. And I just feel that utilizing something that's more user-friendly might be better for your average everyday person. And another thing that's not user-friendly for newcomers is updates. So if you're coming from Mac OS or Windows, you're likely used to having an update utility that will keep your apps and operating system up to date and free of security flaws. Prior to Raspberry Pi OS Bullseye, all of these actions were done in the terminal and they looked something like this. In the latest iteration of Raspberry Pi OS, they tried to make it easier for people to get updates without knowing all sorts of terminal commands. But, as you can see here, it doesn't always work. And when you get errors like this when you're using a GUI, the only way to figure out what's wrong or try to get it to work correctly is to use the terminal, which means you're going to need to learn some form of basic Linux commands. Now this could happen across any distribution. This doesn't apply simply or solely to Raspberry Pi OS. However, I feel that the update utility that they give you in other distributions is more stable. So they've used their GUI update utilities longer. This is something that's new to Raspberry Pi OS, so it's prone to have problems. It's something that will most likely be fixed over the course of time. So depending on when you're seeing this video, this might not even be an issue anymore. But the bottom line is, whenever there is an issue, you're going to have to go to terminal more than likely to try and figure out what the problem is and fix it. So in summary, The good is that the OS is stable and there's a lot of literature for beginners to help them out. The bad was that the add remove software is not exactly user friendly. It can be difficult for beginners to figure out how to install new applications. And the ugly was that there's no way around learning terminal commands with this operating system. So that about does it for this one, guys. I wanted to try and keep this short, and I really wanted to focus on the beginner, because that was really what Ian was asking about in his question at the beginning of the video, was what is a beginner going to see if they were to buy a Raspberry Pi or a Pi 400, and it comes with Raspberry Pi OS. So this is what they're going to get out of the box, and I felt these were some of the problems that new people are going to run into and will more than likely be frustrated with. I appreciate everybody again that watches this video. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and if you got any questions, just hit me up in the comments.